You wake up when your body is ready. No alarm, no schedule, no place you need to be. You sit up, stretch, and ask yourself one question. What should I do today? For the vast majority of human history, this wasn't a hypothetical. This was every single morning for roughly 300,000 years. And the answer to that question looked nothing like the life you're living right now. Modern humans spend tens of thousands of hours of their lives working. That's roughly 1/3 of your waking existence dedicated to a job. But for the overwhelming majority of human history, the modern concept of a job didn't exist. There was no employment, no wages, no boss, no career ladder to climb. So what did people actually do all day? Let's start with what we know from some of the best evidence we have. In 1963, anthropologist Richard Lee studied the daily activities of the Jew/Honzi people in Botswana, one of the few remaining groups whose traditional lifestyle could offer clues about hunter-gatherer life. He found that adults spent a relatively small portion of their week acquiring food, roughly 15 to 20 hours in some estimates. The rest of their time wasn't simply doing nothing. They were preparing food, making tools, caring for children, maintaining fires, traveling, repairing things, resting, and spending time with other people. And similar patterns have been observed among other hunter-gatherer societies, including the Hadza in Tanzania, the Ashe in Paraguay, and Aboriginal Australian groups. Different environments, different continents, different cultures. But one important pattern appears again and again. Survival didn't necessarily require the kind of non-stop labor we imagine. Now, some of you are thinking, but those are modern people. How do we know ancient humans lived the same way? Fair question. And the answer comes from archaeology, anthropology, and bones. When archaeologists compare skeletons from ancient hunter-gatherers with early agricultural populations, the differences can be striking. Early farmers in many regions were shorter, showed more signs of nutritional stress, had more dental problems, and often experienced more repetitive physical labor. That doesn't mean hunter-gatherers lived easy lives. They absolutely didn't. They faced injury, disease, hunger, harsh weather, dangerous animals, and periods when food was scarce. But the evidence suggests that the transition to agriculture often came with a major increase in repetitive labor. And then there's something even more fascinating: art. In 1994, explorers discovered Chauvet Cave in southern France. Inside were paintings created roughly 30,000 years ago. Horses, lions, rhinoceroses, bears, rendered with perspective, shading, and a remarkable sense of movement. These weren't crude stick figures. This was sophisticated art that required skill, planning, and most importantly, time. Someone entered a dark cave, worked by firelight, prepared pigments, planned compositions, and carefully painted animals onto the walls. They weren't simply trying to get through the next hour. They were creating something. And in Blombo's cave in South Africa, archaeologists found roughly 100,000-year-old perforated shell beads. Tiny holes had been drilled through seashells, apparently so they could be strung together as ornaments. The nearest coastline was around 20 kilometers away. Someone had to travel there, collect the shells, bring them back, and carefully modify them. Then there's music. In 2008, researchers reported a roughly 40,000-year-old flute carved from a vulture bone in Germany. It had carefully positioned holes and demonstrates that people in Ice Age Europe were making musical instruments. These weren't isolated finds. Across Europe, Africa, and Asia, archaeological sites contain evidence of decorative objects, pigments, ornaments, elaborate tools, and other activities that went beyond the bare minimum needed to stay alive. This is one of the biggest clues we have about how ancient humans spent their time. They didn't just survive. They created. They decorated. They played. They made things beautiful. So let's reconstruct what an ordinary day might have looked like. Not as a perfect schedule, because ancient humans didn't have one, but as a plausible example based on what we know from hunter-gatherer societies. You wake up around dawn. The fire from last night is still smoldering. Someone adds wood. You eat leftover meat or fish from yesterday. Maybe some nuts, roots, or berries collected earlier. Breakfast is social. People talk. They share information. They discuss where food might be found and what needs to be done. Around mid-morning, a small group might leave to hunt or gather. But here's the key. You don't necessarily go every day. If enough food has already been acquired, some people might stay near camp. You might work on tools, sharpen a spear, weave a basket, process plant fibers, or scrape an animal hide to make it soft and usable. This is work, but it's not work in the modern sense. There's no clock, no supervisor, no timesheet. The activities of survival are woven into the rest of life. You do them because they matter, because competence matters, because being skilled helps the group, because making something well is satisfying. And if hunting happens, it's not necessarily the frantic chase you see in movies. Some human groups may have used persistence hunting, where people track an animal over long distances and exploit our ability to regulate body temperature through sweating. But hunting methods varied enormously depending on the environment, animal, technology, and culture. A hunt might take hours, including tracking and travel. Eventually, the animal is brought back and butchered. Everyone eats. And once the immediate work is finished, something happens that modern people find surprisingly difficult to imagine. Nothing and everything. People rest. They sit in the shade and talk. They play with children. They groom each other. They make jewelry from shells, beads, or animal teeth. They carve designs into bone or stone. They repair tools. They tell stories. They nap. Anthropologist James Woodburn and others who studied hunter-gatherer societies have documented the enormous importance of social life in these communities. And this makes sense. In a small society without banks, written contracts, supermarkets, or modern welfare systems, relationships are incredibly important. Who helps you when you're injured? Who shares food when your family has a bad week? Who teaches your children? Who do you trust? Your relationships aren't something you squeeze into an hour after work. They're part of survival itself. Then the sun sets. And this is when something remarkable happens. People gather around the fire. During the day, conversations might focus on practical things. Where were the animal tracks? Which plants were ready? Who needed help? Who wasn't sharing fairly? But at night, conversation can become something much bigger. Stories, myths, jokes, memories, ancestors, the origins of the world, places nobody in the group has ever seen. The future. This is the kind of environment in which human culture could flourish. Not because everyone had nothing to do, but because social interaction, storytelling, teaching, and entertainment were woven directly into everyday life. And then comes sleep. The idea that everyone in the ancient world followed one universal sleep schedule is probably too simple. Sleep patterns varied across cultures and environments, and evidence for segmented sleep exists in some historical contexts. But before modern artificial lighting, nights were certainly different from the brightly lit nights we experience today. Darkness changed what people could do. So here's what a day might have looked like. Several hours acquiring or processing food. Several more hours making tools, preparing materials, caring for children, maintaining camp, and doing other necessary tasks. Many hours spent socializing, teaching, storytelling, playing, grooming, resting, and simply being around other people. And importantly, there wasn't always a hard boundary between work and life. That may be the biggest difference of all. Then, around 10,000 years ago, something changed. In several parts of the world, humans began independently developing agriculture and domesticating plants and animals. And agriculture transformed everything. Once you can produce more food in one place, you can support more people. More people means larger settlements. Larger settlements create new problems and new possibilities. But farming also required enormous amounts of repetitive labor. Planting, weeding, harvesting, processing, storing, protecting crops, managing animals. And in many early agricultural societies, the archaeological evidence suggests that people paid a significant physical and nutritional price for this new way of life. But agriculture had another consequence. Population grew. And when populations became larger and more settled, specialization became possible. Toolmakers, potters, weavers, builders, traders, soldiers, priests, administrators. Eventually, entire systems developed around specialized occupations. And somewhere along that road, the modern idea of a job began to emerge. Your time could be exchanged for resources. Your skills could become your occupation. Your occupation could become your identity. And eventually, your entire day could be organized around a schedule created by someone else. Today, you might spend tens of thousands of hours working. Your ancestors didn't live in some perfect paradise. They struggled in ways we can barely imagine. But they also lived in a world where the boundary between work and life was completely different. They didn't wake up thinking, how can I maximize my productivity today? They woke up thinking about food, family, weather, tools, animals, stories, and whatever needed to be done. You spend your life chasing achievements, wealth, status, and success by standards society created. They had their own problems, their own conflicts, their own ambitions. But they also had something that is increasingly difficult for modern people to find. Time spent simply being with other people. You make art if you can find time after your job. They made art as part of life. You schedule time to see your friends. For them, relationships were woven into everyday existence. And that's what makes this comparison so strange. We're not a different species. We're the same humans. But we live so differently from the people who occupied almost all of human history that their lives can feel almost alien to us. We traded some forms of freedom for food security. We traded leisure for population growth. We traded unstructured time for productivity. And perhaps the strangest thing isn't that ancient humans had no jobs. It's that they never needed a word for free time. Because life itself wasn't divided into work and everything else. It was simply life.